The first thing I'm presenting to the board is, in my mind, and you know this well because you're about building cadences and operating systems, is look, at the end of the quarter, you as your management team, I don't care if it's you and one co-founder or you and you've got a full functional management team, you should be sitting down quarterly with your team and reviewing, hey, on our priorities at an aggregate level or functional level, how do we do?
Right.
What's working? Let's do more of it. What's not? How are we diagnosing? Are we resetting priorities? And then what do our key metrics tell us? Point which you need to get to. The board meeting's not much different than the output of that deck. I don't think you're putting together a dramatically different deck. It's the same deck. And the hard discussions you've already had, where you've had tough discussions with your directs and the rest of it, it's already been had internally. And the outcome of the board meeting should be a couple days after that where you've respun it a bit. And so that's job one. That's job one. If you can do that, where you as an executive on a quarterly basis have been reviewing your priorities, know how to measure it, and then come back to the board on what went well, what didn't, you're 80% of the way there.
Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on AI.
Sure.
Is it as big of a deal that you think people are saying it is?
When I joined the technology industry, I got out of business school in 1997. Netscape had just gone public. So this is the browser, you know.
You and I started at the same time.
The dawn of the internet.
Right.
Then if you think about that, the sort of 1.0 businesses, Web 1.0, and then there was cloud, SaaS, if you will. And I was at the forefront of that with Salesforce. And then to some extent mobile, although I think it's a form factor, I think it's a different market.
Right.
And so, look, we do go through these tectonic shifts. And I think there is a tectonic shift as represented by AI in two areas in my mind. One is, if you really think about the majority of business software applications, they tend to be, there's tabs on the top, there's things on the left. If you really think about those, they're a graphical interface to the underlying tables that sit in the database scheme of what you use.
Right.
And as a human, you go enter data in, you hunt and peck across, and there's information there, and then but it's in your head to process what to go do. And then the other challenge that we've had is that we've done all this unbundling, right? When I was at Salesforce running product, and I was thinking about the App Exchange and what products we wouldn't, if we couldn't build because we had to decide what we could build or not build, I thought max people would spend was $100 a user on top of what Salesforce didn't build. Now an SDR stack's like $1,500 a month. So there's been this grand unbundling explosion where each user is now using 10 to 15 apps for their basic workflows they do a day. So think about this. We've got an application interface isn't great, and now I've got 9 applications. So in my head, I still have to piece all this together.
Right.
So I'm not sure how much more productive we're making human beings. And so I think what UX AI represents is a complete fundamental reset of what the user experience should be for business application. There should be a cognitive layer that when I log into an application, it's gathered data from other systems that I'm using, other data points. And when I interact with it, it should basically say, hey, what are you trying to do? Let me help you do it. Hey, based on what's been going on, here's something you should go focus on, etc. Like as an example, does it make sense to go to a screen and have 9 dashboards to look at it? Oh, by the way, from a dashboard perspective, you need to be relatively smart to go build those dashboards because you needed to know what question you were trying to answer that the dashboard would then go show.
Right.
But if you have 3 dashboards and you as a human going through your day, supposed to look across 3 dashboards to figure out, well, what is it really telling you where you should go focus? And then you multiply that over 5 to 8 apps. It's a shit show. AI represents a fundamental rethinking. I'm working with companies that are reimagining business intelligence, who's basically coming in and saying, hey, based on this, here's what's going on, here's what you should go focus on, and here's what you should go do. And of these things that you should go do, we can take care of some of them. I believe that in the next 5-10 years, that will become the standard for how we expect applications to work. And so if you do not rethink your UX through that construct, I think you're irrelevant long term. Secondly, I do think the concept of AI as an agent. It's similar to the UX, but there's people, AI are going to replace people in roles and okay, some of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I'm a little more positive and think through, if I'm an individual doing a role, I'm a salesperson, I'm a marketing person, I'm a success person, I'm an R&D person, if I could hire 5 people that were really smart and knew me and what I wanted to go do, could they go work on my behalf such that I could do higher value added work? And I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Yep.
I mean, last 10 years, we went and hired a ton of SDRs and said, well, if we give you outreach or sales loft and you just go send a bunch of emails, suddenly that's going to yield a lot of outcome. Not necessarily. So I do believe as we think about individual functions, I don't think we need as many headcount. And I think of the headcount we have, they're going to be doing high value add work. And so that's kind of the way, I think about AI. Now, I think what is interesting for people investing in AI or software founders doing AI is that AI used to be proprietary. And so you had a proprietary advantage because you had better AI, ML people, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
That's now all commoditized.
Right.
And it's a boom. All these billions of dollars going into the models open source, is amazing. And now your differentiation has to be what you're going to do with it. And so I think what is interesting is we don't invest in a lot of companies whose business model that is worried by, oh, what if OpenAI improves its model dramatically? Then no one needs my product, right? And so, yeah, what we think about is, do you have important metadata? Is there an important business problem or business process that someone would use you to solve, such that you're gathering interesting data? And are you leveraging AI to make whatever that business process that somebody was trying to do 3 to 5x better? That's what we think about. And long-term differentiation is, can you build some level of a data moat, right? Like if you were better than anybody else at helping whatever, industrial manufacturers, check for quality control issues and manufacturing production lines, and you gather that data across similarities, are you much better at detecting that problem, right? So that you have a moat. I do think it's a huge deal. I'm not necessarily bought into the valuations that I'm seeing for anything that sprinkles on the AI fairy dust.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that we may end up with some of the same problems we created over the last 5 years.
Right. I think a lot of people are concerned about. I haven't seen any company in history that finds huge productivity, grows, and doesn't add people though. And I think that's what AI has the capability of doing. I think technology's always increased and provided us better jobs.
Right.
So I don't know if this was going to be much different besides the scale of it.
Well, like here's the hopeful one. When I started my job, I think I was the first person with a laptop. There was no internet. When you went home, you went home. You brought papers home, but you were not on 24/7. We're all on 24/7 now, especially with the iPhone and work, et cetera. And then with COVID, the separation of what I'll call personal life and work life, especially for Americans, is very blurry, which is great from a productivity perspective. I'm not sure what it does for mental health or what I call mental quietness.
Right.
There's a reason why there's a high preponderance of mental health challenges for kids of successful executives in tech in America. My hope is that with AI, maybe some of these agents, I can go home at the end of the day, spend some time with my family, and the AI agents work on my behalf and, do that work for me. And it allows me to do what I'll call higher value add work. That's the hope.
You recently just published an article about presenting to the board.
Oh, you saw that? Yeah.
I did see that. What would you say are like the top 3 most important elements to presenting to the board as a CEO?
The first thing on presenting to the board is, in my mind, and you know this well because you're about building cadences and operating systems, is look, at the end of the quarter, you as your management team, I don't care if it's you and one co-founder or you and you've got a full functional management team, you should be sitting down quarterly with your team and reviewing, hey, on our priorities at an aggregate level or functional level, how do we do?
Right.
What's working? Let's do more of it. What's not? How are we diagnosing? Are we resetting priorities? And then what do our key metrics tell us? And so if you get to that point, which you need to get to, the board meeting's not much different than the output of that deck. I don't think you're putting together a dramatically different deck.
I agree.
It's the same. It's the same deck.
Right.
And the hard discussions you've already had, where you've had tough discussions with your directs and the rest of it, it's already been had internally.
Right.
And the outcome of the board meeting should be a couple days after that where you've respun it a bit. And so that's job one. Like, that's job one. If you can do that, where you as an executive on a quarterly basis have been reviewing your priorities, know how to measure it, and then come back to the board on what went well, what didn't, you're 80% of the way there. The second thing I would say is never surprise the board. It still stuns me, the small percentage of founders that don't send monthly investor update emails at the end of each month. Now, I'm in the Slack group, so I know kind of more what's going on. I talk to founders at least twice a month, but that's not the case for all your investors, especially if you get to Series B, Series C, Series D. You send an update, let's say you have a December fiscal, end of January, send your update January. You send the end of February, right? And then you get into your board meeting in March. There's no major surprises. If something's not going well or et cetera, it allows you to tee up a little bit, and we'll talk about it at the board meeting.
Right.
Because that way the board is coming to the meeting sort of open, willing to discuss, et cetera. Whereas if you sort of shock them and suddenly you throw them for a loop, it doesn't really make it sort of a productive discussion. I think the third thing is, especially as you start to build out a management team, if you do it right, it's a very motivating experience for your management team. And what I'll get to, it could be demotivating. But like, if you're going to do a board meeting and the people are flying in, the night before there is a board dinner. And at that board dinner, you have your directs come to the board dinner. And the board wants to sit with them, have some drinks, get to know them, realize that most board members used to be them, or are, it's like, there's this weird thing like, oh, the board, right?
Right.
And then second, you have the board meeting and you have your closed session to start. Then you bring in all of your management team. I see people bring them one by one, like they're there on the firing line,
Right. It's
which
like,
is also
like an interview.
which is also very silly, because if the salesperson's there and there's a conversation going on, wouldn't the product or salesperson, marketing person want to hear that?
Yeah.
Like bring the team in, then structure the session appropriately where you do yours and then allow the functional leaders to go through theirs. And then allow time, for a closed session for just feedback, et cetera.
Right.
Just get those nuances correctly. On that piece, and this was written, my good friend Alex Lopes at ShareBird, which is one of the largest communities for B2B product marketers and marketers, like, well, if I get called to the board, what do I do? I'm just kind of like, chill, right? A board presentation is no different than if you're not on the management team to presenting to, if you got called into the executive offsite to present.
Right.
And how do you just present logically, et cetera? And a lot of it, quite frankly, and this, is it's all about energy. If you put a presentation together and you memorize it, it's going to be a disaster because you're going to come in like a robot. And people forget that, like, when people are looking at you at a meeting, they're trying to figure out if they like you or not, the energy you're emitting.
Right.
And once they like you, then they listen.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the gist of the conversation.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, obviously, the operating system piece connects to me. Like, I always tell people, like, you shouldn't be having to spend so much time to get ready for the board meeting. That work is already done for you on your annual session, your quarterly session. You're already defined your KPIs, your OKRs. Your weekly meeting is all about this cadence of, like, talking about the things that are not working, triaging them, getting them back on track. And your board meeting is the same thing. Like, you should be able to go in there with 2 to 3 good, meaty things to discuss to get their feedback, opinions, shared experiences from, right? Versus coming in there and trying to memorize some speech, because you should already know your business.
Yes. I mean, I think one other tip for board meetings, which is interesting. So, look, you also have to manage the time. What I hate the most is when there's a founder who's got their 3 hours, and then there's an area to dig into, and the board wants to dig into it, and then the founder's like, we got to get moving. Like, you either didn't schedule enough time or there's too much content.
Right.
Like, if you're just coming to present to us and you don't want our feedback, we don't need to, like, fly out, have a board dinner, that's a waste of our time. The one thing I will say is you often have board members who'll be like, and so some areas you might want to do a deep dive. Maybe there's a challenge in the business. Let's just say retention is dropping. Right. So you want to do a 30-minute deep dive. Perfectly makes sense. And so if there are areas you want to deep dive, make sure you send the broader set of materials, appendix stack that people can review ahead of time. But one thing I'll say is sometimes we'll be like, hey, maybe we should have a board meeting where we're going to brainstorm. And then you go, and then if you brainstorm, the board members leave the meeting going, oh, shit, they don't know what they're doing because we're brainstorming.
Right.
So I don't generally think it makes sense to openly brainstorm on any functional topic with the board, regardless of what they say.
Yeah, you're opening up a can of worms by brainstorming.
Yes.
Brainstorming with the board, right?
The other thing that I would do as a CEO, if there's some big topic that you want to discuss that's difficult, like, hey, we're running out of cash, we might need to do more financing. Or, I need to fire this executive and whatever. It always makes sense the week before to do a one-on-one with your board members. We've already gone through that sort of hard, cathartic conversation.
Right.
So they come to the board meeting sort of already in acceptance. A lot of what you work on, what you work with customers, your clients on, same as me.
Yeah.
Like, how do we get to a cadence? Like, what is the operating system? Because once you get to a cadence, it's much easier to go execute. And without that, it's impossible to scale.
What I think is so interesting too, people a lot of times assume I only work with first-time founders. My longest clients are the ones that are multi-time founders.
Right, because they have come to terms with, oh my God, I wasn't good at that. Right? The Mark Twain quote, which I love, which is that good judgment only comes from experience, but you only build that judgment based on bad experiences, something like that.
Yeah, a lot of my clients, especially the longer term ones that I go every quarter, every annual with them, they like that consistency. They're multi-time founders. They've been there, done it before. And maybe it's some of the earlier founders feel like they should already know this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think as they get larger, the issue isn't that does the founder know the operating system. They need their functional leaders to embrace. And people get so worried about OKRs and all these kind of things and the rest of it. It's just like, folks, can we have a cascading sense of priority such that, one, people know what they're working on, how it's linked to what's important,
Right.
and are we prioritizing it, and are we measuring it?
Yep.
Right? And then what's the what's the ultimate goal we're trying to get towards?
Right.
This is the step towards. So few people get the basics correct. It's the same thing with selling, right? There's 47 different sales methodologies, Miller Hyman, Pink Sheet, Blue Sheet, MedPick, and the rest of it. It's all the same thing. Like, have you uncovered a pain that somebody has
Right.
that it's worth a lot of money for them to solve, that somebody in power believes that you can solve better than others,
Yep.
and that they need it now?
And what's missing in both those pieces is people know pieces of it, but they don't have it connected together.
Correct.
And I think that's where I find where there's truly a disconnect. It's like, oh, I get KPIs, or I get OKRs, and maybe not my whole team does, which your whole team needs to understand that. But then how's it work together?
Correct.
And that's where the cadence keeps everything together. And without that cadence, without connecting these tools, even like in a sales model, like you're saying, or a sales process, it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, look, the interconnectedness of what I'm working on, does it matter, is really important. I don't read a lot of business books. People like, do you watch Silicon Valley? And yeah, but it felt like I worked there. Or do you watch Succession? And I'm like, oh God, no.
Today is the 10-year anniversary of when Silicon Valley came out.
Yes, I know. One of the best episodes of all time, when he goes in the Vision Quest, it gets stuck in the porta potty. Remember?
Yes, absolutely.
On peyote. A book that I would always have first-time manager always hand out to first-time managers is Drive.
Yep, it's a great book.
And look, you don't need to read beyond the first 50 pages, right? But the question of Drive is, how do you get people to work beyond being financially motivated, right? Because we can talk about work-life balance, but if you're serious about winning in a market, startups are super hard. And what you try to do is you say, I got work-life balance, but you try to hire people to make terrible work-life balance decisions, and they make terrible work-life decisions not because you force them to, but because they can't imagine not doing it. And so how do you get people emotionally motivated? And if you remember, it really gets back to the core of what motivates humans beyond money.
Purpose, learning, and empowerment, I think, are those the three?
Close. Yeah. Well, the first one is the need for mastery. Am I getting better at a certain skill? If I'm in this job, am I getting better? The second is the need for self-direction. So if I'm getting better in this skill, are you entrusting me to do more or provide less direction? Right? And that's pivot. Those you can do pretty well. The third one, which is really hard, which is impact, which is why is the work that I am doing, even if I'm getting mastery and getting promoted, why does it matter for this company?
Right.
And then why does this company matter?
Right.
But if you can link those up, you can get people to work really hard.
Awesome. Well, I do have one last question for you.
Okay, absolutely.
And potentially the most important question of all. You're on a desert island. You're trapped for the rest of your life.
Okay.
But you have a boombox. You're You have endless supply of batteries, but you can only bring one album with you to listen to the rest of your life. What would that be?
Probably a Tribe Called Quest.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
Yeah, very diverse album.
It is a diverse album.
They just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
They did.
Yeah, so probably that one.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I love what we've talked about already.
Sure, you can.
Sorry it went so operational.
No,
but
it's
I know
perfectly
you're.
fine. I'm an operator.
I similar to me, like early on in venture for me
Yeah.
was all SaaS. Like, and I think a lot of those companies are more dialed in than some of these other, software-based companies.
Mhm.
But to me, operating is everything. And I know that your background with the companies that you worked with,
Yeah.
you're an operator. And I feel a lot of boards don't have operators on.
No, they don't. That's the other
And you
challenge.
need to have like hopefully an independent board member that maybe is a CEO,
Yeah.
founder that has this experience or had played that role before.
Yeah, look, I'm an operator and I'm very direct. So
That's because you're an operator.
Well, yes, but at these board meetings, for example, I have to very much write down. Well, one, I will read the board deck and write to the founder what my high-level observations are before I go to the board meeting. So I don't feel the need to have to say what I have to say.